comes a moment when your life looks completely fine from the outside, but feels strangely hollow on the inside. You're busy. You meet your responsibilities. You answer emails, pay bills, show up for people, chase goals. By most standards, you're doing well, and yet, in the quiet moments, late at night or in the stillness of an ordinary afternoon, something feels missing. Not success, not validation, something deeper. A quiet sense that you are moving, but not truly living, that you are functioning, but not fully awake. Buddhist philosophy warns that the greatest tragedy is not death. It is living an entire life without awareness. It is drifting through routines without ever questioning them. It is chasing desires you never chose consciously. It is defending identities that were built from fear, comparison, and expectation. From the outside, everything may look stable, but inside, there is restlessness. And that restlessness is not weakness. It is a signal that your life is asking to be examined, not just endured. In this video, you will discover 7 powerful Buddhist truths that quietly separate those who merely exist from those who truly awaken. You will learn why craving disguises itself as ambition, how unconscious identity shapes your suffering, why waiting for the right time is often fear in disguise, and how daily awareness, not dramatic change, is what transforms a life. By the end, you won't just feel inspired. You will understand where your suffering begins, how to recognize it clearly, and how to step out of autopilot and into conscious living. Lesson 1. You are living on autopilot. There is a dangerous comfort in routine. You wake up, move through your day, complete your responsibilities, and tell yourself this is simply what adulthood looks like. But pause for a moment and ask yourself something uncomfortable. When was the last time you consciously chose your thoughts instead of repeating them? When did you last question the direction of your life instead of just continuing it? Autopilot does not feel dramatic. It feels normal. That is why it is powerful. You do not notice it happening. Days blend into weeks. Reactions repeat themselves. You say the same things, feel the same frustrations, chase the same goals, and call it stability. But repetition is not the same as intention. Habit loops quietly take control. The brain prefers familiarity because it feels safe. Once a behavior is rewarded even slightly with approval, comfort, or distraction, it becomes automatic. You scroll without thinking. You react defensively without pausing. You pursue achievements because you were taught that achievement equals worth. Slowly, conditioning shapes you. Family expectations, culture, past failures, and social comparison build an identity around you. And then something subtle happens. You begin protecting that identity. You act in ways that maintain the image, even when it no longer reflects who you truly are. This is how unconscious living strengthens, not through chaos, but through quiet repetition. In Buddhist philosophy, this state is called avidya, ignorance. Not ignorance of facts, but ignorance of reality itself. It is the inability to see clearly because the mind is clouded by conditioning and assumption. When you live on autopilot, you are not truly choosing. You are reacting from programming. But the moment you observe your own patterns without immediately obeying them, something radical begins. Awareness creates distance between you and your habits. It interrupts the cycle. It reveals that you are not your conditioning. And in that realization, a shift occurs. Awareness becomes the first act of rebellion. It is the quiet decision to stop drifting and start living deliberately. Lesson 2. Craving is disguised as ambition. Most people believe they are exhausted because they are not doing enough, not successful enough, not productive enough, not ahead enough. So they push harder. They wake up earlier. They set bigger goals. They compare their progress to strangers on the internet and call it motivation. But what if your exhaustion is not coming from laziness or lack of discipline? What if it is coming from constant chasing? Look closely at your life. How much of your effort is fueled by quiet comparison? You scroll through curated lives and feel a subtle pressure to catch up. You measure your worth against milestones that were never originally yours. You chase the next promotion, the next purchase, the next achievement, believing that once you arrive there, something inside you will finally settle. But notice this pattern carefully. The moment you reach one goal, another appears. The satisfaction is brief. The hunger returns. The chase never truly ends. That is not ambition. That is craving. In Buddhist philosophy, this is called tanha, the thirst that can never be fully quenched. Tanha is not simply desire. It is the restless attachment to outcomes, recognition, and validation. It convinces you that peace exists somewhere in the future, just beyond your current position. So you sacrifice the present moment for a promise that constantly moves. This is why you feel tired even when you accomplish so much. You are not exhausted because you do too little. You are exhausted because you chase too much. There is a difference between purposeful effort and restless craving. Purpose flows from clarity. Craving flows from lack. When your ambition is driven by comparison, it quietly drains you. When it is driven by awareness, it strengthens you. The turning point begins when you ask yourself a brave question. If no one could see your success, would you still want it? The answer reveals whether you are building your life from alignment or from thirst. And that awareness changes everything. Lesson 3. You mistake identity for self. From a young age, you begin building a version of yourself that feels solid and dependable. You learn what earns approval and what invites criticism. You discover which traits make you accepted and which ones make you vulnerable. Slowly, almost invisibly, a mask forms. It may look like confidence, intelligence, responsibility, toughness, kindness, or independence. Over time, you stop seeing it as a mask. You call it your personality. You call it who you are. But pause for a moment and look deeper. How much of this identity was consciously chosen, and how much of it was shaped by fear, expectation, and survival? Perhaps you became the strong one because weakness was not safe. Perhaps you became the achiever because praise felt like love. Perhaps you silenced your real interests because they did not fit the image others had of you. These adjustments seem small in the beginning, but layer by layer, they create a small identity. An identity designed to function, not to awaken. In Buddhist philosophy, there is a profound teaching called anatta, or non-self. It challenges the very idea that there is a fixed, permanent self to defend. What you call you is actually a collection of memories, habits, reactions, and roles constantly changing from moment to moment. Yet you cling to this constructed identity as if it were unshakable truth. You defend it. You protect it. You shape your life around maintaining it. And here is the uncomfortable insight. You are defending a version of yourself that does not actually exist in any permanent way. Think about how much energy is spent maintaining an image. You hesitate to try new paths because they do not match who you think you are. You avoid risks that might challenge the story you have told about yourself. You hold on to borrowed dreams because letting them go would require admitting that the old identity was incomplete. This is where suffering deepens, not because you are incapable, but because you are loyal to a story that no longer fits. The moment you see identity as fluid rather than fixed, something powerful happens. You realize you are not trapped inside a label. You are not obligated to defend an outdated version of yourself. And this is where the real escalation begins. Because once the mask loosens, you are faced with a new question. If you are not the story you have been protecting, then who are you becoming now? Lesson 4. Your mind is not your master. Most people assume that because a thought appears in the mind, it must be important. Because it feels urgent, it must be true. Because it repeats itself, it must be solved. But this is where suffering quietly multiplies. Your mind produces thousands of thoughts every single day. Many of them are random. Many are conditioned by past experiences. Many are fueled by fear. Yet instead of observing them, you obey them. And over time, the mind stops being a tool and starts acting like a master. Look closely at mental loops. A conversation replays again and again in your head. A mistake from years ago resurfaces as if it happened yesterday. A future scenario begins to unfold in detail, usually with the worst possible outcome. The body reacts as if the event is happening now. Heart rate rises, muscles tense, stress hormones activate, but nothing is actually happening. This is imaginary suffering. The event exists only in thought, yet the body pays the price as if it were real. You are not suffering from reality, you are suffering from projection. Future anxiety works the same way. The mind tries to predict and control what has not yet arrived. It creates scenarios, prepares arguments, rehearses failures, calculates risks. It believes that constant thinking equals protection, but overthinking rarely leads to clarity. It leads to paralysis. The more you analyze every possibility, the more uncertain you feel. The more uncertain you feel, the more you think. This cycle becomes exhausting, not because life is overwhelming, but because the mind refuses to rest. In Buddhist practice, the solution is not to destroy thought or force silence. It is to observe thoughts without attachment. This means recognizing that a thought is simply a mental event, not a command. When a worry appears, you notice it. When a fear arises, you label it. Instead of immediately engaging, you create distance. This small shift changes everything. You move from being inside the thought to watching it. And once you can observe a thought, it loses authority. Your mind is a powerful instrument. It can plan, analyze, and create. But it was never meant to run without supervision. When you identify with every thought, you become unstable. When you observe thoughts with awareness, you regain balance. Practical awareness begins with simple pauses. Before reacting, breathe. Before spiraling, ask whether this is happening now or only in imagination. Before assuming the worst, check the evidence. The goal is not to have fewer thoughts. The goal is to stop being controlled by them. When you understand that the mind generates content automatically, you stop taking every thought personally. And in that space between awareness and reaction, you discover something important. The mind is not your master. It is your instrument, and you decide how it is used. Lesson 5. You are addicted to familiar pain. This is the turning point most people avoid. It is easier to blame circumstances, other people, or bad luck than to admit something deeper. Sometimes the suffering you complain about is the suffering you unconsciously choose. Not because you enjoy pain, but because it feels familiar. Human beings are creatures of pattern. Emotional patterns, especially, become deeply wired. If you grew up around criticism, chaos, neglect, or pressure, those emotional climates begin to feel normal. Later in life, you may say you want peace, stability, and respect, but your nervous system is calibrated to recognize intensity as familiar. So without realizing it, you gravitate toward relationships, environments, and behaviors that recreate the same emotional atmosphere. The mind calls it chemistry. The body calls it recognition. In truth, it is repetition. Trauma repetition does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it appears as constantly choosing emotionally unavailable partners. Sometimes it appears as overworking until burnout because exhaustion feels productive. Sometimes it appears as staying in situations that drain you because leaving would feel unfamiliar. The pain is uncomfortable, but it is known. And the unknown, even if healthier, feels threatening. In Buddhist understanding, this reflects attachment, not only to pleasure, but also to suffering. We assume attachment only applies to things we like, but attachment is simply clinging. And you can cling to pain just as tightly as you cling to comfort. When suffering becomes part of your identity, releasing it feels like losing a piece of yourself. If you have always been the one who struggles, who endures, who survives hardship, then who are you without that story? There is also a strange sense of control in familiar pain. If you have been hurt in a certain way before, you know how to brace yourself. You know how to respond. Predictable pain feels safer than unpredictable peace. So you return to the same emotional cycles, telling yourself it is coincidence. But patterns are rarely accidents. This is the powerful realization at the center of awakening. You are not just reacting to life. You are participating in the repetition. The moment you see the pattern clearly, without shame or self-attack, you interrupt it. Awareness breaks the automatic return. It forces you to sit in discomfort long enough to choose differently. Choosing differently often feels strange at first. Calm may feel boring. Stability may feel unfamiliar. Respect may feel suspicious. That discomfort is not a sign you are making the wrong choice. It is a sign your nervous system is adjusting to something new. Freedom does not always feel exciting. Sometimes it feels quiet. Attachment to suffering keeps you loyal to old versions of yourself. It convinces you that the pain is part of your identity. But suffering is an experience, not a definition. When you stop offering your wounds a permanent seat in your life, space opens. And in that space, a new pattern can begin. This is where real transformation happens. Not when life changes for you, but when you stop returning to what hurts simply because it is familiar. Lesson 6. Waiting is a form of fear. Many people believe they are being wise when they wait. They tell themselves they are preparing, planning, gathering information, building confidence. On the surface, this sounds responsible. But look closely, and you may notice something uncomfortable. The waiting never seems to end. The perfect time never fully arrives. The clarity you promised yourself remains slightly out of reach. And so the dream, the decision, the conversation, the change stays postponed. Not cancelled, just delayed. Delay often feels safer than action. When you delay, you protect yourself from immediate failure. You avoid criticism. You avoid uncertainty. You avoid the possibility that your effort might not produce the outcome you hoped for. So you stay in research mode. You think a little longer. You refine the plan again. You tell yourself that when you feel more ready, you will move. But readiness becomes a moving target. The bar keeps shifting, and slowly, delay becomes avoidance. There is an illusion hidden inside the idea of perfect conditions. You believe that once everything aligns, confidence will appear naturally. You believe that fear will disappear before you begin. But fear rarely disappears before action. It softens after action. If you wait for certainty, you may wait forever. The mind wants guarantee before it commits. Life does not offer guarantees. It offers opportunities that require courage. Often fear disguises itself as preparation. You convince yourself that more knowledge will remove doubt, that one more course, one more strategy, one more conversation will eliminate risk. Preparation is valuable, but it can quietly turn into protection from discomfort. You might not be preparing for success. You might be preparing to avoid vulnerability. And vulnerability is the doorway to growth. In Buddhist teaching, there is the principle of right effort. Right effort is not passive waiting. It is not forcing outcomes either. It is balanced, intentional action, aligned with clarity. It recognizes that movement is necessary. Not reckless movement, but deliberate movement. You take the step that is available now, not the one that guarantees the entire path. Waiting for the entire staircase to appear before you lift your foot is unrealistic. You see the next step by taking the one in front of you. This is where the escalation happens. If you have recognized your autopilot patterns, your craving, your false identity, your mental loops, and your attachment to familiar pain, then waiting becomes the final shield. It is the last defense that keeps you from fully stepping into change. You can understand everything intellectually and still remain stuck if you never act. Action does not require dramatic transformation. It requires honest movement, making the phone call, setting the boundary, starting the project imperfectly, speaking the truth even if your voice shakes. Small actions disrupt the cycle of delay. They build evidence that you can move despite fear. You do not overcome fear by waiting until it leaves. You overcome fear by proving to yourself that it does not control you. Right effort means you show up consistently, even when conditions are not ideal. Especially when they are not ideal. Life will never freeze itself to match your comfort level. The moment is already here. The question is no longer whether you feel ready. The question is whether you are willing to move anyway. Lesson 7. Awakening is a daily decision. Many people imagine awakening as a dramatic breakthrough, a powerful realization, a single life-changing moment where everything suddenly makes sense. They wait for clarity to strike like lightning. They expect transformation to feel mystical, overwhelming, undeniable. But this expectation quietly keeps them stuck, because awakening, in its truest form, is not an event. It is a practice. Awakening begins in ordinary moments. It begins when you notice your reaction before it controls you, when you pause instead of escalating, when you choose honesty instead of performance, when you sit with discomfort instead of escaping into distraction. These decisions do not look dramatic from the outside. No one applauds them. No one may even notice them. But internally, they change the direction of your life. Living consciously means refusing to drift. It means questioning your impulses. It means asking why before acting. Why am I pursuing this goal? Why am I reacting with anger? Why am I agreeing when I want to say no? Awareness brings responsibility. Once you see your patterns clearly, you can no longer blame them entirely on circumstance. You must choose whether to repeat them or interrupt them. That choice, repeated daily, becomes awakening. Choosing presence sounds simple, but it requires discipline. Presence means fully engaging with the moment in front of you instead of constantly rehearsing the future or replaying the past. It means listening without planning your response, working without fantasizing about the outcome, resting without guilt. Presence anchors you in reality. And reality, unlike imagination, is manageable. Most suffering multiplies in abstraction. Presence reduces it to what is actually happening now. Aligning action with truth is where transformation deepens. You may understand your values intellectually, but alignment demands behavior that reflects them. If you value peace, do your choices support it? If you value growth, do your habits reflect it? If you value authenticity, do your words match your inner experience? Alignment closes the gap between who you believe you are and how you live. That gap is where much of your discomfort originates. Awakening is not about abandoning your life and starting over. It is about inhabiting your life fully. It is not about escaping responsibilities. It is about meeting them consciously. You do not need a new identity. You need consistent awareness. You do not need a perfect plan. You need daily honesty. Disciplined presence means you show up to your own life repeatedly, even on difficult days, especially on ordinary days. You correct yourself when you drift. You return to clarity when you react unconsciously. You take responsibility when you fall back into old patterns. This steady commitment builds strength that is quiet but unshakable. There will still be challenges. Fear will still appear. Doubt will still arise. Awakening does not eliminate difficulty. It changes how you relate to it. Instead of being swept away, you observe. Instead of collapsing into old habits, you respond intentionally. Instead of searching for meaning externally, you create it through your actions. In the end, awakening is not mystical. It is disciplined presence practices daily. It is the decision, again and again, to live with awareness instead of autopilot. And that decision, repeated over time, reshapes your entire life. One day life will test you again. It will not announce itself. It will not warn you in advance. It may arrive as criticism, disappointment, uncertainty, temptation, or unexpected change. The difference is that this time, it will not meet the same version of you. It will not meet the person who chased endlessly without questioning why. It will not meet the one who confused conditioning with identity or anxiety with responsibility. It will meet someone more aware. It will meet someone who sees craving clearly instead of being dragged by it. Someone who recognizes conditioning and pauses before reacting. Someone who understands that fear can speak loudly without being obeyed. It will meet someone who no longer clings desperately to labels and outdated stories just to feel secure. It will meet someone who refuses to confuse mere existence with truly living. That shift is quiet, but it is powerful. It changes how you respond to pressure, how you handle desire, how you move through uncertainty. You may not notice the transformation in a single dramatic moment, but one day you will respond differently than you once did. You will remain steady where you used to spiral. You will act where you once delayed. You will release what you once defended. And in that moment, you will realize that awakening was never about escaping your life. It was about inhabiting it consciously. You do not need a new life. You need new awareness. If even one of these truths unsettled you, that means you are ready. Subscribe for deeper Buddhist wisdom that challenges you, not comforts you. And comment below, I choose awareness.